Yar! One of the most fascinating periods that has always captivated my interest is the fall of the Ming Dynasty and the rise of the Qing. Officially proclaimed in 1644, the Qing was China's last imperial dynasty and the largest polity to ever encompass the landmass of China, excepting the Mongol Empire in its entirety, though larger than the Yuan by itself. The Ming was one of China's glorious dynasties, the dynasty of brightness, and it fell to an invading force of Manchurians. Unfortunately, there's very little written on this in English. The magnum opus on the subject appears to be The Great Enterprise, 1,200 pages in 2 volumes by Frederick Wakeman, professor of China Studies at Berkeley. However, each volume is in the neighborhood of $90, and 1,200 pages of scholarly writing on the early Qing might be a little bit beyond me at this point. Instead, I've just finished reading another book that I want to talk about today, Coxinga and the Fall of the Ming Dynasty by Jonathan Clements, sometimes billed as Pirate King, Coxinga and the Fall of the Ming Dynasty. This is a book that sat on my shelf for over a year, and I took it with me to Cuba in December to read on the flight and on the beach. I blew through about half of it there and was so immersed that I preemptively included it in last year's Top 5 Nonfiction, which I released at the end of the year. Let me tell you, the second half of the book hasn't changed my mind in that at all. Coxinga was the last loyalist of the Ming and the pirate king of Taiwan. He remained the most dedicated Confucian who refused to surrender in any capacity to the invading Manchus, even when the war was long lost for the Ming. He ultimately conquered Taiwan, drove out the Dutch, threatened the Spanish in Manila, and was twice declared a god in China and in Japan. Coxinga, born to the name Zheng Sun by his father, named Fukumatsu by his mother, was half Chinese, half Japanese, a pirate, a scholar, and ultimately the national hero of Taiwan. His father was Zheng Jilong, known throughout the book by his Christian name as Nicholas Equan, a common pirate that worked for Li Dan, known as Captain China, the pirate overlord of the Chinese waters that routinely swindled Europeans looking to establish trade relations with the late Ming. When Captain China died, there was succession struggles, but Equan emerged victorious, where he was soon bought off by the Ming with an admiralship in exchange for defeating the lesser pirates hounding China. He brought his young son over from Japan, the product of a love affair from some years earlier, and had him trained with the best Confucian education money could buy. It was at this time that the Manchus mounted their invasion, and the treachery of General Wu Sangui at the Great Wall sealed the deal. Although Coxinga is the primary focus of the book, there is an adequate amount of time spent on the fall of the Ming itself. In fact, all of Chapter 5, The Treason of Wu Sangui, some 20 pages, deals with the pivotal events that led to the emperor's suicide and what was essentially the end of the dynasty, and I must say I found this exceptionally fascinating. It spells out the brief background of Li Zicheng, the bandit king that mounted his own insurrection against the Ming and was briefly declared an emperor before raping the general's concubine and Wu Sangui opening the gates of the Great Wall and joining forces with the Manchus to march south and avenge his emperor, now dead by suicide upon Li Zicheng's seizure of Beijing, and oust Li from power for the obscene treatment of Wu's concubine. 2 parenthetical notes here. First is that although the Manchus are not 100% center stage in the narrative, Clements does include an appendix in the back of the book that goes over a brief but detailed outline of the Manchu history prior to Prince Dorgon amassing his forces north of the wall opposite Wu Sangui. This appendix covers things like Chinese relations with the Manchus for trade of the precious Manchurian ginseng, and the Chinese maltreatment therein and accumulation of Nurhaci's power. It's almost like a bonus chapter in the book. The second note I'll mention here is that there is a minor endnote concerning the fate of Li Zicheng after his flight from Beijing with Wu and Dorgon on the march to oust him. Li, a man who, with only one eye, from a previous injury, is long believed to have died in one of the battles following, or deserted or been murdered by his own men. Although Clements' endnote recounts that a one-eyed man claiming to have once been an emperor showed up at a Buddhist monastery in 1646 and stayed there as a monk until his death in 1674. His tomb, some 20 years after the fact, had Li's likeness. This is note 1 of chapter 6. There is a portion of the book that actually had me outright laughing. I'm not sure if that says more about the book or more about myself. A good portion of the latter chapters deals with Coxinga's clash with the Dutch on Taiwan. Governor Coyet, the Dutch commander of the island, became fearful that Coxinga would eventually try and evict the Dutch from the island, falling back to Taiwan as a stronghold. Coyet, with minimal forces, sent many letters to his superiors in Batavia, Jakarta, warning of the possible assault by Coxinga. Coxinga, for his part, sent a letter to Koyut that, 1, told him that he had absolutely no intention of taking Taiwan, and 2, that he always lied bold-faced to his enemies to misdirect them. Batavia, doubting an invasion but placating Koyut, sent a naval force to assess the situation, assist if needed, and if not, return to Batavia and attack Macau, the Portuguese settlement, en route. The commander of the naval forces took one look at Taiwan and set sail immediately for Macau, hoping to grab glory. This is exactly when Coxinga invaded. Koyut and the Dutch holed up in Fort Zeelandia, their fortress, awaiting prayed-for naval assistance from Batavia. Eventually a ship arrived. The officials at Batavia were fed up with Koyut's paranoia and had sent a new governor to replace him, along with a letter demanding Koyut's resignation. The new governor-to-be, Klenk, arrived with said letter, calling Koyut a paranoid lunatic and saying Coxinga would never attack, just when Coxinga had 900 warships and 25,000 men besieging Fort Zeelandia. Koyut, eager to rub Batavia's nose in this, repeatedly agreed to a resignation and to the turning over of the safe fort to Klenk, but Klenk prevaricated unceremoniously. Eventually, under some pretense or other, Klenk sailed off, offering no help, but decided not to return to Batavia with nothing but an embarrassing failure under his belt, so he attacked and raided a passing merchant ship on some open water, only to discover that the ship had been sailing with a Dutch permit and that he'd just committed piracy against Dutch trade. To cover this up, he scuttled the ship and abandoned the crew. If YouTube had been around back then, there'd be fail videos of this. So I think it goes without saying that I pretty much love this book. Clements here, who I think failed in his book A Brief History of the Vikings, the Last Pagans or the First Modern Europeans, succeeds marvelously with Coxinga. He veers a little bit into the sensationalist, and tends to pander to a wider, popular audience. For example, referring to as many characters by their Western names as possible, Nicholas Equan, all the titles of various emperors, yet tells a detailed, immersive story about not only one of the most fascinating figures in Chinese history, but history overall. I already have Clements' book on the despotic Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, and I'm greatly looking forward to diving into that. I'm going to give Coxinga a full 5 stars, one of the top non-fiction books of 2014, and one I would highly recommend. China has regional accents in the same way that any large country would, and apparently it's not uncommon for southern Chinese to refer to northerners as pirates, because the north has this RRR inflection that they put on everything. For example, the Mandarin word for some, or a little, is pronounced in the south as Yidian, whereas in the north it would be pronounced Yidiar. So you can picture Coxinga talking with one of his admirals, and it might go something like this. "Aye, Captain, how many gold doubloons did ye pilfer from that Spanish galleon yonder fortnight ago?" "Alas, I only got Yidiar."